today I have my special guest. She's the author of the upcoming book, The Anatomy of Art. No other than Miss Alexandra Beller. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Alexandra, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Alexandra. I spent quite a few years as a professional dancer and since then have been a choreographer and ultimately transitioned into theater, directing and choreographing in theater. And along the way, I became a teacher and have taught artists at every stage of their development, at every age of their development, from very young adult in college to retired professional artists, and in mentoring artists for such a long time, I started to really find the beauty of a well-crafted question. So I wanted to write a book of questions for artists because I feel like we're moving out of an era where art is being taught as a trade and we are teaching the next generation how to make art, and that we're moving into a cycle of um, guiding artists to find themselves and to be less authoritarian and less hierarchical and didactic about teaching art and more invitational and conversational. So it's not a book that teaches you how to make art. It's a book that allows you to find a lot of different pathways to listen to yourself better so that you can hear your own voice, your own artistic vision, and start to really commit to those visions unapologetically. So it is a mentorship book. It's hopefully an inspirational book. It does have a lot of facts in it, but the facts are not meant to guide you towards a particular endpoint. So I feel like I've had a lot of different careers: professional dancer, choreographer, teacher, along the way, also a mother. And becoming an author seemed like an inevitable step that would be next. And part of what's beautiful about it right now is that all of my work so far has been ephemeral, meaning I make it, people come to the theater, they see it, and then it's gone, it disappears. And there's something so beautiful and daunting, scary about making something that, with permanence, making something that people can pick up for potentially forever. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm in the middle of, or at the end stages of writing this book about creative process, which is essentially a field guide for artists.
Miss Alexandra, for sure this will be inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So, what does the title The Anatomy of Art mean to you personally?
That's a great question. I, of course, am a dancer and I teach something called Bartenia Fundamentals, which is very much about how the human body works, how the joints work, how the bones work, muscles work, and finding our most efficient use of our physical anatomy. So, anatomy is a big part of my life. And what anatomy means to me is the way that something is put together, and understanding the way it's put together to allow it to function at its highest level. So when I think about the anatomy of art or the parts that make up art, and when I'm talking about art, really, I'm talking about time-based art like dance, theater, music, things that happen in real time. Although I hope that the book is also valuable for painters and composers and writers. But when I think about the things that make up time based art, I came up with 12 categories. I'm sure you could think of 12 totally different categories, and you would also be right. These aren't the only parts that make up the anatomy of art. But I decided that time, space, meaning, relationships, environment, process, facts, faith, communication, material, context and culture, and priorities were these 12 different facets that join together to make up what I'm calling the anatomy of creating art, or the anatomy of the creative process. And the full title is The Anatomy of Art: Unlocking the Creative Process for Theater and Dance. So I'm thinking I go into each facet, like there's a chapter called Time, and there's an essay about time, and there's writing prompts and an embodiment exercise and a creative exercise, score, note from another luminary in the field, um, and about 100 questions about how time is functioning in your art and in your creative process. And then I repeat that structure for each of those titles that I mentioned before. Again, it's not the only way that you could break down the anatomy of art, but just like you could name all the bones in the body, you wouldn't have named, every system in the body, but you're doing a thorough scan of how the skeleton works. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do for art. I'm trying to do a thorough scan of a lot of different facets of the creative process.
Beautifully articulated, Miss Alexandra. Very well said. What part of the creative process do you explore most deeply in the book?
Um, well, those 12 chapters are all given equal weight, but I do think that one thing in the book, there are a couple through lines in the book. One of them is authenticity, so not trying to be something that you imagine or follow a trend or fit into a mold, but really trying to feel yourself, and from that feeling and very deep listening to yourself, to find the route to express that most authentically. So something about um, disinhibition, being unapologetic, and authentic, while generating an incredible amount of empathy. And so I would say that those things, authenticity and empathy, um, are through lines in every chapter.
Interesting indeed, Miss Alexandra. Do you believe creativity is something people are born with or something that can be taught and nurtured?
Both. Absolutely both. Absolutely 100%. Our entire evolution has creativity built into it. And if you look
True.
at the development of species and what we've done as a civilization, for good and for bad, I'm not saying the things that we create are always positive, right? We've also created
Yes.
nuclear weapons and all kinds of, elements of mass destruction. So creativity by itself is not always positive, but the urge to create and to develop is absolutely hardwired into our DNA as a species. And then it is nurtured or it is rejected. It is um, invited and fed, or it is shamed and cut off. And this happens at a pretty young age. It happens first with your parents, and then in your education system, and then in the kind of people that you surround yourself with. Um, do some people naturally, systemically have more of a mindset of resilience, and that spirit, that urge to create is stronger than the urge to fit in or belong? I think so. Just the way some people are naturally drawn towards leadership, and some people naturally want more to be part of a process and part of a community, and some people feel like just naturally charged to lead a community. And there's no good or bad. We need people who are creating, but we also need people who are, following somebody else's ideas and making, because the creator's not always the person who's best suited to fulfill their own creative urges, right? Like, if you think about certain kinds of design or animation, etc. Those people need technological minds that are not necessarily trying to invent something, but really know how to follow a system and create the thing that an inventor has imagined. So we need all kinds of people in the world. Creativity is not the beginning and end of our society. But I believe for sure we are all born with the ability and imperative to create, and it is nurtured or not nurtured along the way. But I don't think we're all meant to be inventors because we need somebody to actually enact the things that are invented, right?
Yes, totally agree, Miss Alexandra. How do you break down the anatomy of art? Is it emotional, technical, spiritual, or all of the above?
It is for sure all of the above. I think making art is an emotional and spiritual practice, but it's also technical and factual and scientific. And so I go into all of that in the book. For example, in the chapter on time, we talk about the sensation of time, the construction of time. You know, we basically, as a species, made up this idea of time in terms of its units and measurements, but also in terms of the expectations we create socially around what you'll do by a certain age, whether that's developmental milestones or career milestones, right? So we've constructed all of that as a species, and we can deconstruct it or reject it. But then there's also, you know, the sun rises and the sun sets, and there's a certain amount of hours in between that rising and setting at a certain time in the year where you live, and that is the passage of time. So time is both objective and constructed, and it's felt and sensed. And so in the chapter on time, we talk about the neurology of time, our survival instincts that are quite time based. Like if you think about an animal at a heightened moment, they're either stalking, and that's this sustained time, or they're attacking, which is this quick time, right? And that experience of time is different and relates to survival and potentially to a fear of death, which I do talk about in the book. But then you also have this sense of like, you know, when you're waiting for like a medical test result, those days can feel endless. And yet, when you're you know, on a roll with something, or you know, in the middle of a totally engaging conversation, you'll look and hours have passed and you can't imagine why. So there's so much both subjectivity and objectivity to our experience of time. And I go into both and the emotions that it brings up, both for us and for our audience. What does it mean for our audience when we make them wait for something? What does it mean when we throw something at them over and over and over again? What does it do to their nervous system? And different nervous systems, like a neurodiverse system or a neurotypical system, are going to respond differently to your art. So we talk about both the science and the psychology underneath the science.
What challenges did you face while writing about such a broad and deep subject like art?
Well, the broadness was, I think, the first challenge because, you know, art is a mirror for life. So basically saying, you know, if I wrote a book proposal and said I want to write a book just about life, no publisher would take it. Way too broad. And yet writing about art feels just as broad. So figuring out what my facets were was one of the first challenges. And I would say that for me personally, one of the next biggest challenges was letting go of wanting to please everybody. I have a deep feeling as a human that I want everybody included. I want everybody invited into the room. I want everybody to feel accepted and celebrated. And I found myself writing with a lot of modifiers and caveats. You know, this might not be true for everyone, or often, or sometimes, or you know, in some cases. And it was hedging, and it wasn't making a statement, and it wasn't just saying what I believe and recognizing not everyone will agree with me. And that was a painful shift for me to make as a writer, to say, I may be leaving some people out here. Not everybody will feel that this applies to them. So then what I decided to do was make more of a choose your own adventure and say, like, you know what, I'm going to actually invest in the fact that everything I say will not be for somebody. So what's for them? And make something for them. And what's for somebody else who was not included? Let's make something for them. And now you get to look at the options and you find yourself. And part of the choose your own adventure is another way to ask artists to take ownership of finding themselves in the book, seeing themselves, and listening to themselves. Like, does that resonate? Oh, that one doesn't resonate. Does this? That's me. That's me. And I want the artist reading the book to feel like they have that embodied response to it, where they get to make, they have autonomy within the book itself. They don't have to do every exercise. They don't have to read every essay. You know, they could start reading something and say, this is actually the opposite of what I need to work on. I need, oh, that's interesting. This is the opposite of what I need to work on. What is it I need to work on? And that just rejecting some part of the book gives them something, gives them access to an opinion or a framework about themselves. So the book is not trying to be an authority, it's trying to be a mirror.
Certainly, a mirror that empower people out there. So, Miss Alexandra, as an artistic director and author, what would be your short-term and long-term goals for both?
You know, I am very curious to ride this book and see what it opens. I, in a lot of ways, don't have any goals for where things will go after this. I just finished beta testing the book, so I put out a call for applications, and 90 people responded saying, "Yes, I'd like to spend a month working with one chapter of your book to give you feedback." And I'm just finished that cycle, so I received all of this feedback from people and had Zoom meetings where I got to ask them questions about their experience with their chapter. And a lot of the feedback was overwhelming to me in its positivity, honestly. Like, uh, I heard a lot of people say, like, this book really hasn't been written and this is going to revolutionize the field, to an extent that started to scare me, and feeling like I'm not sure I was planning to write that book that was going to change this landscape. That's a lot of pressure. So I'm trying to, in some ways, not be overly attached to a fantasy of what will be next after this. I'm trying to stay very present with it, which is my advice for artists in the book, to not necessarily cast ahead for what will this be and where do I want to go and where do I, because I think sometimes we can miss the changes and transformations that happen when we stay present in the journey. So while I have fantasies for ways that my life may twist and turn, I'm actually trying to stay out of that mode for the most part and just stay with what the book is trying to say right now and just listening to it and not thinking too much about what it will do in the field and where it will take me in my career. I love everything that I'm doing right now. I think if I suddenly, which is not going to happen, became independently wealthy and didn't need to work, I think I would pretty much be doing most of what I'm doing now. I just wouldn't need to charge for it, and I would still see my dance movement therapy clients, and I would still teach classes, and I would still write books and choreograph and direct plays, but I would be able to do it as a volunteer. Um, so I think, I don't know where I want to go. I'm staying with the present journey of it.
Good luck to your goals and advice, Miss Alexandra, and hoping for more and more and more books to come. So, can you share one of your favorite insights or lessons from the book itself?
Okay. Yes. One small bit of advice for artists that I think transcends artists is about how we relate to our inner critic, which I think all of us have, regardless of our profession. But I think for artists, it can be particularly loud. And I think a lot of us have this very antagonistic relationship with our inner critic. You know, it will talk to us and say bad things about us, and then we try to swat it away. And it's constantly this push pull. And I think a lot of what I hear is that people try to silence their inner critic. But I actually think there's some interesting material to discuss with our inner critic. And really, a lot of times we're having a conversation with fear and shame. And I think that that conversation is worth having out loud. So, one thing that I recommend in the book, and this is given with the caveat that this needs to feel safe for you emotionally, you need to have the emotional framework and resilience to be able to support yourself and recover from this activity. So if it feels overly scary, I don't recommend doing this. It's a bit of a dangerous, radical act. But what I suggest to my reader is that you let your inner critic have the floor, have the mic. And so what that looks like is, um, you know, if I were going to go ahead and let my inner critic speak right now about the book live, uh, she might say, uh, you know, you're fooling yourself. Nobody's going to want to read this book. You know, you don't have a PhD, and um, uh, you never became the most famous artist, and you know, nobody's going to take this seriously. You don't know what you're talking about. Everything's too general, right? And just go ahead and let her say it's gonna sell 100 copies and fail miserably. Go ahead, say it out loud. I want to hear it in the room. And then I can have a conversation as if, you know, maybe a friend said all that to me over lunch. What would I say to them? Wow, that's a lot of really strong thought. Where are you getting that from? What are you basing that on? And I would start having a conversation that I would have with a friend if I were in a really high level place and wasn't reactive and wasn't feeling like, how could you talk to me like that? Don't talk to me like that anymore. That's mean. Right? Okay, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to try to get underneath that. What's what's your evidence for that? What's making you feel that way? It's maybe related to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or you know, cognitive behavioral dialectical therapy, in which we start to listen to the critique, the negative, the shame, and then have a conversation with it instead of just rejecting it. Because I find when you reject it, you just quiet it. It goes to the back, and it's still in a push pull with you all the time. So, my recommendation, and again, you have to check in with yourself beforehand to see if you are like emotionally resilient at this moment to be able to hear it, because sometimes it comes out and it's your mother's voice or your father's voice or your dance teacher's voice, and you've got trauma related to it. So, you need to be ready to hear this. But if you are at that point where you're ready and you're able to have a high level conversation with this inner critic, I think that it can be quite a transformative conversation. And for me, a lot of times that 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 particular statement that the inner critic's saying at that moment just goes away. Because when I start digging under it, they're like, you know, I'll say, do you feel like life experience and being in the studio for 30 years doesn't equate to a PhD? And then my inner critic will say, no, that's a pretty valuable education that you got. I don't necessarily think a PhD gives you more validity than that. That's true. You know, we start having a conversation and we actually can break down the thought. You know, you also sound a little angry. Are you angry? And we talk about, you know, we talk about all the different aspects that are making them say this very harsh statement to me. And I try not to get mad at them. I try to talk to them the way I would maybe talk to one of my children who was having a big emotional moment and be like, I'm not going to be reactive to this. Let's get underneath it. You know, you're yelling at me that you hate me, and instead of saying, "Don't talk to me like that," I'm going to say, "Wow, that's sounds like a lot of feeling. What's going on? What made you feel that way?" And come with empathy and compassion. And I think we need to do that with our own inner critic.
Certainly, communication with your own critics, people. Very well said, Miss Alexandra. Beautifully, beautifully articulated. And thank you so much for your knowledge, for sharing us. So, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to one of my audiobooks, people, audiobooks about available on Audible. Of course, my Book 101 Review Volume 3 suggestions, my Book 101 Review Volume 2 selected, and Book 101 Review highly recommended. These are my first no, not first season of my first season episodes of Book 101 review, and of course one of my self-help book, Threads of Existence, Weaving the Tapestry of Life. And life is too short, a journey of discovery, fulfillment, and joy. And of course my Stand Tall, Stand Together, Breaking the Chains of Bullying, and my climate change book, Earth's Fever, the Unraveling Climate, and Our Race to Restore Balance. Please listen to them, available and bestsellers on Audible. So, Miss Alexandra, for my last question, if you could describe this upcoming book of yours, The Anatomy of Art, in 3 words, what they be?
Empathetic, grounded, and supportive.
Awesome, Miss Alexandra Beller. Thank you so much for sharing your upcoming book to the world, and hoping for more and more and more empowering books to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming The Anatomy of Art?
In terms of being able to reach me, find me,
Yes, please.
yeah, just feel free to Google my name, Alexandra Beller, Beller. My website, alexandrabellerdances.org, DANCES, and you can find more information about my work on that website. And I will put a tab about the book on it soon.
Yes, and I'm inviting you, Miss Alexandra, once you publish it, come over and let's talk about it again.
Sounds great.
Let's promote your, for sure, inspiring book.
Thank
So, Miss
you.
Alexandra, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Modicom people, see you soon.